call these unique American artists travelogers. They are independent filmmakers, combining talent, imagination, and hard work to create travel adventure films. Travelogers have researched the history of their subjects, lived on location for months at a time, and photographed their journeys. After completing each film, travelogers travel throughout North America with films in hand to share their personal discoveries and insights with thousands of people. The film you are about to see was made by traveloger Clay Francisco. A former Time Life photographer and a journalist at heart, he has traveled to more than 80 countries. Francisco has received significant recognition for his films, including an award by the American Film Festival in New York, and has had the honor of appearing more than 30 times before the prestigious National Geographic Society in Washington, D.C. Now, Clay Francisco invites you to traverse the vast expanse of the Soviet Union as he personally narrates his film, A Russian Journey.
It covers 1/6 of the Earth's surface, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or Russia as we commonly, though rather incorrectly, call this vast part of the world. 129 different ethnic groups, Armenians, Georgians, Ukrainians, as well as Russians. Yet the official Soviet version of history is essentially Russian history. Novgorod, west of Moscow, is where it all began. Here a Kremlin, translated a fortress, was built by Scandinavian traders. The local people, Slavs by heritage, called them Rus, hence the name Russia came into being. All this happened around the 9th century, and since then ancient Novgorod has been designated as the birthplace of the first Russian state. Eventually many Russian kings passed through here. They were called Czars or Caesars. And within Novgorod's Kremlin is a monument to them and to the 1,000-year history of Russia. Depicted are many of the great names of that history: Ivan the Terrible, Catherine the Great, many of the Romanovs, and 6.5-foot Peter the Great. Westward from Novgorod, you pass through the wooden villages of North Russia. Here, in the swampy coastline near the Baltic Sea, Peter built a new capital. He called it St. Petersburg. It's now called Leningrad. Now in Leningrad, a famed bronze horseman statue of Peter recalls the reasons for that new capital. Peter discovered Russia had no all-year port to trade with Europe, so he captured this area from the Swedes and proceeded to build his window on Europe, his new capital, St. Petersburg. Well, those who followed in Peter's footsteps also contributed to the grandeur of the city. For example, on the outskirts is Peterhof, Petrodvorets, the summer palace of the Czars. Here are acres of parks, statues, old palaces, churches. There are scores of fountains. Many are trick fountains. Well, now, city children run through the fountains, climb over the statuary, once designed for the children of the nobility. But for many, the great treat here is the Grand Cascade. The water supply is natural. It tumbles down through a series of golden fountains from the palace level above. Usually operative only a couple of months of the year in the summertime. The rest of the year, fountains are stored away through those rather long, severe Leningrad winters. Well, this is only one of many old Tsarist palaces to be found in the city of Leningrad. Another one near the heart of the city, and also with a golden spire. It's now the Admiralty Building, headquarters of the Soviet Baltic Fleet. On this day, the flags, the banners were out, for this was Leningrad's most important holiday. This was Navy Day. You could see officers conferring, preparing for the arrival of nearly 500,000 people that will come to Leningrad to celebrate Navy Day. Well, early arrivals would crowd the embankment, trying to catch a glimpse of all of those warships on display. And if you look closely into their faces, you'll see a very strong Scandinavian influence. It's understandable. For many years, all of this area was a part of Sweden. A small launch brings the Admiral and all his official party here to the flagship, from which the Admiral will make his opening remarks. In recent years, the military or naval aspects of all of this have been somewhat soft-pedaled, and Navy Day has been converted into a kind of huge water sports show. Swimmers in mass formation, they're following behind a portrait of Lenin. The water is cold. This is like swimming off Alaska. I asked one of those sailors, I said, "Isn't that water cold?" And he answered me in a very charming Russian accent, said, "No, it's not cold, we're Russian." On one side of Palace Square in Leningrad is the Hermitage, one of the world's great art galleries. It ranks alongside the Louvre in Paris or the Metropolitan Museum in New York. A collection of art started first by Catherine the Great. It's still growing. There are 2 million individual items collected by 7 different czars. That comprises much of the collection. You'll discover there are 27 paintings by Rembrandt in the Hermitage collection. Many say its most important single work of art, Leonardo da Vinci's Madonna Lita. The Hermitage dominates one end of Palace Square. In the center, the Alexander Column, said to be the largest single slab of monument granite in the world. It was built to commemorate the Russian victory over Napoleon. Nearby, and also commemorating that victory, is a triumphal arch. And Russians tell a joke about this. They say they understand one's been built just like it in Paris, commemorating Napoleon's victory over the Russians. The revolution of 1917 ended the Tsarist era. Everything began to change, even the name of the city. It now became Leningrad, and communism was the law of the land. Tribute would be paid to a new man, to the architect of that revolution, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. In the center of Leningrad is the Lenin Museum. On top, the clock has been stopped at the hour of Lenin's death. In front, the armored car in which Lenin rode following his return from exile. Painted on one side is his famous revolutionary slogan, "Death to Capitalism." Inside is Lenin memorabilia and paintings glorifying the revolution. As Lenin had returned to lead a group of Marxist intellectuals who called themselves Bolsheviks, as Russia was now in the throes of World War I, things had gone from bad to worse, and the country was ripe for revolution. Tsar Nicholas II was to be the last of the Russian czars. Russia was suffering terrible defeats, great loss of life in that war. Eventually, the Tsar advocated, and a liberal government was formed. Earlier, the Tsar, his family, and his entourage had retreated from Leningrad to the nearby Catherine Palace. Now it's called Pushkin in honor of that famous writer. And here at Pushkin, Nicholas's only son, Alexis, was suffering from that disease of royalty, hemophilia. The Tsarina Alexandra sought solace and spiritual help from a Siberian mystic the world came to know as simply Rasputin. This prompted the revolutionaries to play on Russian fears that it was actually Rasputin who was dictating military strategy as well as government policy, and it was Rasputin who was responsible for Russian suffering and defeats. Lenin died in 1924, and power was passed on to Joseph Stalin. Stalin, who led Leningraders through World War II and a disastrous 900-day siege. The city during that period, often on the brink of starvation. but it never capitulated. Today, there are scores of tour groups that come to the outskirts of Leningrad to visit the memorial to those dreadful times. They are retold the horrors of that siege. 1 million died, 1 out of every 3 Leningraders. There was no electricity, no transportation, little water, and precious food. The bread ration eventually became 125 grams a day. Leningrad has been designated as one of the hero cities of the Great Patriotic War, as Soviets refer to World War II. Kiev, far to the south, is another. Kiev also has a monument to World War II. It's called Mother Russia. To call it anything other than gigantic would be an understatement. Much of this is in tribute to wartime heroics, as today most Russians accept their official version of that war. Most only have vague knowledge of American or British participation. Kiev is now the Soviet Union's 3rd largest city, a city of over 2 million population, a city Ukrainians worldwide hold with great affection. Kiev is the capital of the Ukraine. Once a great kingdom in itself, Ukrainia, it is now one of the 15 Soviet republics. Like most Russian cities, Kiev owes its location to a river. In this case, it is the Dnieper River, which bisects the city. Overlooking is a huge arch. The arch is dedicated to the eternal friendship between Ukrainian and Russian peoples. That relationship was politically solidified with the revolution and the emergence of Lenin. Also overlooking the Dnieper is a huge statue of Prince Vladimir. It was he who embraced the religion of Byzantine and established Orthodox Christianity as the religion of the country, an event of profound significance. Later, his successor, Yaroslav the Wise, furthered the spread of Christianity. Eventually, because of both Vladimir and Yaroslav, Kiev became known as the Jerusalem of Eastern Europe. One of Yaroslav's projects was St. Sophia's Cathedral. It was named after Constantinople's cathedral of the same name. St. Andrew's, recently rebuilt, is another of Kiev's cathedrals. This was the work of Italian architects. Further evidence of religion in Kiev is Lavra, the monastery of the caves. Founded in the 10th century, it's a huge religious complex of churches, cathedrals, and monuments. It all stands atop 73 tombs of monks and saints, as well as over 3 underground churches. For you'll discover separation of church and state really doesn't exist in the Soviet Union. The church owns no property, receives everything, its Bibles, candle wax, vestments, and buildings from the state. Many of the old churches that still function present a view of that curious relationship that exists between the official Soviet state and organized religion. For on days of important religious holidays, hundreds flock to those churches that are open to light candles and to participate in the service. For though church attendance is not prohibited by law, regular attendance will often affect a career, hurt a family economically and socially. And yet, despite the many disadvantages, it is said that 50 million Soviet people attend church at least occasionally. Well, if that's true, then there are vastly more churchgoers than members of the Communist Party. As you travel north from Kiev toward Moscow along approved tourist routes, you'll begin to see evidence that life is beginning to improve for the Russian villager, particularly in those villages near Moscow. But on the other hand, if you compare lifestyle with contemporaries of North America or Western Europe, you'll discover that most Russian villages still today have a long way to go to achieve parity. Yet here, the bright paint does reveal and indicate that life is improving. On the outskirts of the country's largest city, Moscow, you'll discover huge electrified rail stations that take the city's 8 million people from huge new suburban apartment developments into the city proper. City people all live in apartment developments or in some form of communal housing. Single-family homes in the North American sense are virtually non-existent. In one of those units, and very affluent by Soviet standards, are Luba, her young son Valentin, and Luba's husband Yuri. Luba is a chemist, her husband is a physician, and their combined salary plus certain family influence enable them to obtain this small yet comfortable two-room apartment with private bath and kitchen. And according to standards set by Lenin himself, each Soviet citizen is entitled by law to 10 feet of living space. Now that's a room 10 foot square, but most experts today are in agreement that that goal has yet to be realized, and they estimate that at least 20% of the population still live in some form of communal housing, with several families sharing the same bathroom and sharing the same kitchen. But on the other hand, if you are a family that enjoys certain position or influence, you then have blot. Blot's an old Russian expression. It simply means the ability, the clout, to get what you need without undue effort. For example, a doctor, Yuri perhaps, can easily put the butcher at the top of his waiting list, provide the butcher's family with better medical care. In return, and often under the counter, the doctor's family will receive a plentiful supply of the best cuts of hard-to-get meat. Well, all of this is a kind of economic subculture that Russians call nalyeva, or translated, that means on the left or under the counter. So today, if you have blot, influence, clout, and are able to get what you need nalyeva, then life can be much better. For Luba and Yuri, and for all Muscovites, the heart of their city is Red Square, that old fortress, the Kremlin. And as you enter the square, your eyes are immediately caught by the Hansel and Gretel architecture of St. Basil's Cathedral. Built by Ivan the Terrible in the 16th century, it was once a cluster of churches. Now it's merely a museum. Certainly it illustrates the old Tsarist past, and just opposite, the Lenin Mausoleum illustrates the Soviet present. Each day, 30,000 people slowly shuffle across Red Square, eventually to pass through the mausoleum to view the body of Lenin. It takes all day, unless you begin very early in the morning. But the line will be interrupted every hour, on the hour, for the guard change. The smartly dressed young Russian military cadets goose-step up to relieve the old guard. And I've always wondered what many Russians might think if they knew that this tribute to Lenin, the hero and martyr of communism, is guarded by American sentinels. Oh, I'm referring to those trees in the background. They're Colorado blue spruce, native only to North America. After viewing the body of Lenin, most visitors to Red Square will eventually pass behind those red brick walls in the background to enter the Kremlin grounds proper. You may enter through the famous old clock tower gate, the Spassky Tower. Inside, you'll discover there are delightful gardens, parks, ancient churches, old palaces. The Grand Kremlin Palace was once the home of the Grand Duke of Moscow. It's now headquarters of the Supreme Soviet, the largely ceremonial parliament of the Soviet Union. And one of the delegates to the Supreme Soviet is Vera. All of those medals illustrate she has served the state well. Women have risen high in government and industry, but seldom within the Communist Party. And that's the real source of power. Well, this is a thorn in the side of many Russian women like Vera. There's only one modern building within the walls of the Kremlin. The Hall of Congresses also serves as an opera house. There are 6 churches. Today, none function as churches. All are simply museums. The most important of the museums is the Armory Museum, which houses the crown jewels of the Czars. Obviously, each one of those crowns is worth a small fortune. Across from the Kremlin is Goon. It's the showcase store of the Soviet Union. Here, shopping can be expensive, For example, a sport jacket, 48 rubles. A ruble is about $1.25. The average salary, about 200 rubles a month. A woman's slip, 9 rubles. A color television set, 430 rubles, and that's a managerial monthly salary. Inside, GUM is like a huge arcade, several floors surrounded by individual stalls. The stalls always crowded if anything of short supply becomes available, or if anything imported is seen. Shopping is expensive. This young lady said this imitation fur hat would require her entire salary for well over a week. But what you see here in GUM is the best supply available in the entire country. In fact, people from the villages, the smaller cities, will use all of their ingenuity just to get a trip to Moscow in order to go shopping. Radiating from GUM, Red Square, the Kremlin complex, is Moscow's most famous shopping street, Gorky Street. Bordering are new skyscrapers, the best shops, plus the country's famed foreign currency stores, the Beryashky shops, often better known as dollar stores. You'll see no advertising signs promoting consumer products. There are massive displays. Many of the old revolutionary slogans are still quite evident. Displays designed to promote patriotism, governmental accomplishments. Some read, work harder, produce more, support communism. A classic example is a huge monument on the outskirts of Moscow. Beneath, the inscription reads, dedicated to those workers who are building socialism. Near massive displays such as this, you will often see temporary exhibits. This one had still photo coverage of a massive public demonstration held in Red Square. Several times a year, big demonstrations are held in Red Square. Revolution Day is one, May Day another. This one to honor the return to Earth of Russian cosmonauts. Thousands of people march to the square waving banners and flags. It looks spontaneous, but these are extremely well organized, and most of the people here have been brought specifically to be a part of this demonstration. Rather than going to the demonstration, many might prefer to stay home and watch it all on television. Television is now available in about 3/4 of all Russian homes. Much television consists of long speeches, many times by visiting delegations to the city. For example, representatives of the International Women's Congress. Many Russians still do not consider television as a prime form of entertainment. Movie themes, like television, are tightly controlled. And movie themes, very popular, are costumed historical dramas, World War II themes. The audience today, much more sophisticated. No longer will they accept two people holding hands over a drill press as an emotional understanding in a Soviet film. Propaganda films get wide play, a Soviet version of Uncle Tom's Cabin, much of it performed in blackface. For most visitors to the country, the great entertainment treat is found in this, the great theater, the Bolshoi, housing the foremost exponent of the classical ballet. As Russians will crowd street corner ticket agencies weeks in advance in order to buy a ticket to a performance of the Bolshoi. But most of these potential ticket buyers will be disappointed, as Bolshoi performances are consistently sold out. A spectacle of a different type can be seen on the outskirts of the city, the huge exhibition of economic achievement. Here, each one of the 15 republics which comprise the Soviet Union can display products from their region and take rightful pride in the many accomplishments of recent years. The architecture also reflects the state-approved standard of Soviet creativity. It's called socialist realism. There are also many foreign language signs, as the exhibition is always a routine stop for foreign tour groups. There's also a positive statement about America, Soyuz 7, vehicle of the combined U.S.-Soviet spaceflight. Nearby is the massive Space Needle, a reminder of the fact it was the Soviet Union that first successfully conquered space. Well, here America did make a penetration. Muscovites are now members of the Pepsi generation. Several years ago, the Soviets tried to develop their own cola beverage. It was tested but failed. Nevertheless, it did have an intriguing name. They called it Comrade Cola. But the traditionalists prefer vending machines which dispense a soft drink called voda. It's a kind of fruit drink, and the machines also illustrate the communal way of life. All customers use the same glass. But there's a handy do-it-yourself glass washer available. Most dispense a soft drink called limonade, which obviously means lemonade, but the name has no bearing on the flavor you might get. It might be lemon, but just as easily it could be apple, pear, or grape. Whatever, it's always called limonade. Many of these voda vending machines can be found at the huge Gorky Park of Rest and Culture. 275 acres near the very heart of Moscow. Here, plenty of places to relax. You also might feel a bit closer to the average Russian. Sit on one of those park benches. Someone may open a conversation, and that may be one of the more interesting parts of your Moscow visit. Here in the atmosphere of the park, it's quite a contrast to the heart of the city. You might enjoy mingling with the crowd. Ice cream, a Western export to Russia, and it's been our experience, the best ice cream you don't find in ice cream stores nor in cafes. The best is always from street vendors in the park. All of this was a rather festive day in the park. It was Children's Day, and the balloon vendors were out in force. Special entertainment and events had been scheduled for the young. Sidewalk painting. You'll discover Russians are devoted to their children. Our children are our future. It's an old Russian proverb, yet family life in today's Soviet Union is under great pressure. A combination of crowded living space, as well as pressures that come from two working parents, are instrumental in creating an extremely high divorce rate. Crowded living discourages more than one child. For Soviet families do not desire more than one child. One thing they do desire is an automobile. You'll discover a few interesting facts. It takes a physical examination to get a license. It's against the law to drive a dirty car. Finding spare parts can be a nightmare. You may follow the lead of all Russians. They never park without locking up the windshield wipers to prevent a moonlight requisition. Well, finding spare parts is difficult. Finding a book is not. Russians are devoted readers. Newspapers are posted on outdoor billboards. There are big displays for Pravda. That's the Communist Party daily newspaper. It means truth. The other daily newspaper is Izvestia, which means news. There's one old cynical Russian joke. There's no news in the truth, no truth in the news. One prime source of entertainment for Russians, the magnificent performance of the Russian circuses. Either the Moscow Circus or any one of the 77 permanent circuses in the Soviet Union. The biggest holiday in the Soviet Union is on November 7th. It happened on this bleak day on Palace Square in Leningrad, as it happens each year on Red Square in Moscow. This massive military parade salutes the anniversary of the Russian Revolution. And it also serves as a reminder to the world of the awesome power and might of the Soviet Union. Military vehicles roar through the square with flawless precision. Soviet leaders say all of this is proof of the success of that 1917 Russian Revolution. Others may differ, but whatever, the development of the 2,000 years of the Russian experience is one of the world's most intriguing stories. Well, some experts will tell you that all of this power and might was created by exploitation, domination of the many by the powerful few. Others may differ and say it was created by hard work, determination, belief in a new system. But whatever, all experts are in agreement that all of those explanations at one time or another have played an important part, and that today, despite name changes and sloganeering, centralized power to a very few people remains, as it always has, the dominant factor of the Russian experience. Spectacles such as this, or perhaps the excitement of the capital city, whatever the reason, the right to live in Moscow is of prime importance to most Russians, and it is a right. Russian tourists who take the river cruise past the Kremlin view with envy other Russians privileged to live in this city. They have the prize propishka, that's a blue visa stamp on their passport. It's required of all who live in Moscow. A Russian without that visa stamp can stay in Moscow no more than 3 consecutive days. By Soviet law, all Russian citizens must have a passport in order to travel from one Russian city to another. Bordering the river is evidence of the past as well as the present. There's the huge Russia Hotel. It covers 4 city blocks, 3,000 rooms, and no air conditioning. Local Moscow joke, they call it the Comrade Hilton. If you get up early, you might discover the very young on their way to nursery school, as Russians call kindergarten. Both parents usually work, which means that someone must take care of the children. So kindergartens, daycare centers like this have been established, sometimes by the factory, maybe by the trade union, perhaps by the apartment complex. Introductory classes in reading and writing are held, as well as introductory classes on the life of Lenin, who comes out a kind of sainted grandfather figure. And I suppose if you're 6 years old and this is your first year in school, reading can be a most difficult subject. On a graceful bend of the Moscow River is the Lenin Stadium. Opposite is one of 7 massive skyscrapers, all alike, all built by Joseph Stalin just after World War II. This one houses Moscow State University. Here are 30,000 students. Many are foreign. There are a couple of dozen exchange students from the United States. And in this skyscraper campus, the atmosphere is somewhat different than you might discover at a North American university. All very serious here. And that seriousness also applies to student artists, who are expected also to conform to those principles of socialist realism. Their art must show something favorable about Soviet life, or it cannot be placed in public display. Each city or town has a young pioneer palace. These are young pioneers. You note the red scarf. They have hobbies, handicrafts, summer camp. In many ways, the young pioneers can be compared with the Boy Scouts, but also they're highly politically oriented. The Pioneer Palace provides the youngsters the best opportunity for hobbies, handicrafts. Big ones like this have auditoriums. They put on theatricals, often based upon old Russian or Ukrainian, Eastern European folk music. Larger pioneer palaces have nursery schools. These youngsters are far too young to be full-fledged young pioneers. They're October children. That's a tribute to the October Revolution. Eventually, they too will become young pioneers. Being a young pioneer is a Soviet child's first formal institutionalized commitment to a political idea. Russian experts say kindergartens like this one, in fact all schools, and like schools everywhere, they can be either good or bad. The good ones are intensive on the 3 R's, but good or bad, all are intensive on the 3 P's: politics, party, and patriotism. This appears to be a fascinating conversation. He might be saying, "Do you see that new little red-headed girl over there?" Another place important to young people is the wedding palace. In the wedding palace, it is not a religious but a civil ceremony. It consists of the director reading the solemn obligations that the couple have to each other and to the state. The service is brief. It only lasts about 10 minutes, and it is also quite expensive. There's a cost of the wedding dress. It can be rented from the state, but most brides prefer to buy their own. There's also the fee for the use of the wedding palace, and also available is a small hall where sweets and champagne are served. But most couples prefer to go to their parents' apartment or perhaps to a cafe to have the reception in a much less formal atmosphere. And in the cafe is always the traditional toast. As with each toast, the bride and groom are expected to embrace. After the wedding reception, many will drive to the Lenin Hills. That's that overview of the city. Friends and relatives join together. All of the old wedding jokes are revived. And a part of this tradition is to pop open a bottle of champagne and engage in endless toasts to good luck and to good health. For others, perhaps a little more politically devout, they will drive to Red Square, park at one end of the square, then the bride and groom together will solemnly walk the length of the square to the Lenin Mausoleum, there to pay tribute to the founder of this communist state. Obviously, the comparison between this act and a religious act is striking. The wedding bouquet is always left as a tribute. Wedding parties also often place bouquets at war memorials, for certainly if there's one important holiday in this country, that holiday is Victory Day. Victory Day in the Soviet Union commemorates the end of World War II. In the West, World War II is almost ancient history. Not so in the Soviet Union. It's like it happened yesterday. But certainly, if any country deserved World War II tributes, this one did. 20 million died. Much of this country was devastated. Many here on this day were survivors of that dreadful 900-day siege at Leningrad, or helped stop the Nazi advance at Stalingrad. For them, this is a day to remember old comrades. Stalingrad is on the banks of the Volga River, the Volga which is figured so importantly in the life of this city. Stalingrad is now Volgograd today. It was renamed by Khrushchev after Stalin's fall from favor. And today at Volgograd, there are now massive dams which provide hydroelectric power. As today, Volgograd is one of the major industrial cities of the Soviet Union, foremost of which is the city's tractor plant. In viewing modern industry such as this, one often wonders, how can this be done when, on the other hand, Soviet consumer industries consistently produce rather poor or shoddy products? Well, experts are all in agreement. They say it is simply a question of priorities. If the Kremlin wants a new spacecraft, a new tractor plant, even a new refrigerator, if the Kremlin so desires, then the entire resources of the country can be mobilized to any one single task. But over the years, low-priority consumer industries have consistently found themselves at the bottom of the list. On the outskirts of the city is another of those massive war memorials. Note the size of people at the base. This is the Mumiev Mound. It's on a little hill, and then in suburban Stalingrad, a decisive 139-day battle was fought. Again, the Soviets defeated the Nazis. It was another of those turning point battles of the Second World War. This is a group of Russian tourists, and you'll note that most have bouquets. They'll take those bouquets to a huge indoor hall called the Hall of Combat Glory. South and west of Volgograd, toward the Black Sea, you pass again through the Ukraine. The Ukraine, the breadbasket of the country. This is the Iowa, the Kansas, and Nebraska of the Soviet Union. There are great wheat fields, collective farms where many still live in thatched roof cottages. And for many, life really hasn't changed that much over the years. Having enough modern mechanized agricultural equipment is a contributing factor to many of their problems. These are wives of collective farmers. They'll work full days, 5.5 days a week at this field labor. Their children are in daycare centers which have been provided by the collective. Further south is the Black Sea. Here are the major resorts of European Russia. One of the most popular and best known is Yalta. Yalta, also well known as the location of that famed World War II conference between President Roosevelt, Prime Minister Churchill, and Joseph Stalin. They met at Yalta to discuss World War II strategy, and it was here that Stalin was successful in extending Russia's sphere of influence over neighboring countries. The old palace where they met, the Yellowstone lions at the main entrance, still display their bemused expressions to the thousands of visitors who annually pass through here to relive a little bit of World War II history. The most important port on the Black Sea is Odessa. The trademark view of the city, the long expanse of the Potemkin Stairs. And also at the top of the stairs, one of the few statues of a foreigner left standing after the revolution. It's of the Cardinal Richelieu. The reason it was hit by British shells during the Crimean War, it has great historic significance. In addition to being an important commercial port, Odessa is, for many, a resort. There are fine beaches, but apparently not enough of them. Perhaps the most popular of all the resorts on the Black Sea is Sochi. Sochi, there's a mild, almost tropical climate, which each year attracts millions of Russian tourists. Sochi is also quite popular with Europeans, those who want an inexpensive vacation. And it is quite a bargain, certainly if you compare prices with Mediterranean resorts. For the Russians who vacation here, they love the sun. Remember, this is a very cold country. So at Sochi, they spend as much time as possible under that sun. Surrounding the Black Sea are the old Tsarist palaces of the past. Many today have been converted into sanatoriums. Sanatoriums which are a kind of combined rest home, resort, and sanitarium. Eastward from the Black Sea, you began to sense a bit of the immensity and diversity of this country. You cross over the Caspian Sea, over the Caucasus Mountains to Soviet Central Asia. And out here in Soviet Central Asia, you will discover there is great ethnic diversity. Tajiks, Tatars, Kyrgyz, Uzbeks, and the fact that many still wear traditional clothing gives a kind of Arabian Nights image to the entire area. Out here you can also see the great citadel, the main gate through which Alexander the Great passed centuries ago. It's now a main gate to Bukhara, one of the most legendary of Central Asian cities. And here at Bukhara, the Muslim influence is still quite dominant. Even today, high in the minarets, recorded muezzins still call the faithful to prayer. It's been said that this city was so remote that in the 400 years between the 14th and the 18th century, only 2 people from Western Europe ever reached this remote city. Now it is important agriculturally. Cotton is a major crop. And yet, despite all of the changes, The local people still cling to many of their old traditions. They still wear the little skull cap. It's called a tubichetka, a cap which provides needed protection from that hot Central Asian sun. The once famous craft work of Bukhara is now seldom seen. The famous rugs and carpets of the past, they're still made, but immediately placed in export for hard foreign currency. We met a group of young men who joined together to produce brass work. Now, this is not a company. It cannot be in the Soviet Union, as nobody may have an employee except the state. The state also dictates the designs they use, where they can sell their merchandise, and at what price. Mostly they're sold in state gift stores, but they're also sold in a much more fascinating place, the once-a-week bazaar, the old marketplace of Bukhara. Prices do change with supply and demand, and local people joke about that and refer to this old bazaar as a classic example of creeping capitalism. The sister city of Bukhara is ancient Samarkand. From Samarkand, hordes of Mughal warriors moved west and conquered much of Europe. Foremost among the great rulers of Samarkand was Tamerlane, Timur the Lame. One can still visit Tamerlane's tomb with its exquisite tiled dome. Just opposite is a huge public square called a Registan, and all of this has undergone extensive renovation in recent years, much to the credit of the Soviets. Overall, it provides a classic look at classic Central Asian antiquity. Much of this was built at the instigation of Tamerlane, or of his grandson, who later became quite famous as an astronomer. He was called Oleg Beg. And from that time, it became the real center of the universe for Central Asians. Today, there's a new city, a new opera house, and on the side of the opera house, an illustration of a more recent event in Samarkand's ancient history. The largest city in Central Asia, the fourth largest city in the Soviet Union, is Tashkent. The straight lines of modern architecture dominate the city. The reason, at April 26, 1966, a massive earthquake jolted the central part of Tashkent, this in memory of that disastrous event. Well, much of the old center city was destroyed, but much to the credit of the Soviets, they immediately started rebuilding, and much of the new architecture reflects the Muslim-influenced architecture of the past. Therefore, Tashkent today is one of the best-looking of the new Soviet cities. Now in the center is a huge park. Nearby were shashlik vendors. Shashlik, chunks of lamb that roast over hot coals. Usually lamb, but as one Russian explained to us, in an open market like this, it's like Russian roulette. You can't always be sure. Also in the park is one other Central Asian institution, the tea house. The tea house follows Muslim traditions. You never walk on that carpet with shoes, only sandals or bare feet. And the work schedule here is also that of a desert country. People go to work very early. They work until about noon. They may spend all afternoon playing chess with a friend. Then later in the day, they may go back to work until the sun goes down. A very practical schedule in this hot part of the world. You see very few women here. Our friend Mari Haba was one exception. She said that most old-timers feel that a tea house is just not the proper place for a young Uzbek girl. And perhaps all of this does illustrate some of the remoteness, the vastness of the Soviet Union. And if any part epitomizes that, it certainly might be Siberia. But Siberia can be visited. Many do by taking that famous old railroad, the Trans-Siberian. You pass through 8 different time zones before you reach the Sea of Japan at the eastern terminus. You pass through thousands of miles of pine and birch forests, the taiga, the green sea, the endless frontier, as Siberians call it. Massive logging and lumbering operations. Siberian villages are rather grim in outward appearance. The train will not stop at villages of this size. It does stop at larger towns and cities, and immediately experienced travelers rush out to the station kiosk in order to buy bread, sausage, cheese, to supplement the often sketchy dining car menu. The first major city east of Moscow, 1,500 miles from the city, is Novosibirsk. Translated, that means New Siberia. Novosibirsk is the largest city in Siberia, 1.5 million population. Today, Novosibirsk is a modern city. It has a new opera house, and in the opera house, a ballet company famed throughout the world. But on this day, it was not the ballet company performing in the Novosibirsk Opera House, but the dance company from Soviet Central Asia, the Tajik dancers. At public places such as this, rail station, platform, shopping areas, you often see tank cars. They dispense a drink called kvass. Kvass is a peasant drink. It's mildly alcoholic, somewhat like a weak beer. One Russian friend said, Russians are devoted to it, but he said, it's been my experience, most visitors to our country will decline after the first sip. Further east, 3,000 miles further, is ancient Irkutsk. Irkutsk, once the jumping-off spot for the exploration of Siberia. Here in the early days came explorers, gold seekers, later revolutionaries, political exiles. Many who settled here were veterans of those infamous labor camps of the Stalin era. Irkutsk today, in the older parts of the city, offers classic examples of the wooden architecture of the past. But Irkutsk, like most Soviet cities, now has become a city of brick and stone. And though Irkutsk is remote, recently Irkutsk has become the home for many transplanted Europeans. They have emigrated here at the promise of better jobs, longer vacations, early retirement, and these Europeans have brought their own traditions with them. Now in this old Siberian frontier city, Sunday afternoon concerts in Irkutsk Park. They've also brought their memories of World War II, as Irkutsk, like all Soviet cities, has its memorial to World War II. And this one, like all, has an honor guard composed of young pioneers who consider it quite an honor to have been selected for this duty. Every 15 minutes, the guards will change. The weapons, symbolically, are World War II vintage. For many have said it was World War II that contributed most to the development of modern Siberia. Whole plants were packed up, moved out here, reassembled. And possibly the grandparents of these youngsters were among those brought here to build and to develop the plants. Many did not come voluntarily. Today you talk to Siberians about this period of their lives, World War II, the Stalin era, the labor camps. Often they refer to that as a nightmare. Well, everybody knows winter comes to Siberia with a vengeance. Winter in Siberia separates the men from the boys, or in this case, the women from the girls. We joked with the woman in front about women's liberation. She said, of course we're liberated. Can't you tell? We do the same job as men at the same salary. Then one of the other gals approached and said, yes, all that's true, but personally, I would much rather be liberated working in a Moscow department store than out here on the Trans-Siberian Railroad. If you like to ski, Siberia can be a marvelous place to live. Much of the year, you can ski right down the middle of Main Street, on the way to school or on the way to work. That's not a sack of potatoes, but a new little Siberian, all swaddled, which is a Russian custom, whether it's winter or summer. In summertime, rivers provide an important source of transportation, but in wintertime, rivers freeze solid, and this truck convoy Bypassing the bridge at this temperature extreme, it's 40 below zero. The river frozen solid, much sturdier than the bridge, and rolled to this weight, that metal bridge could snap like a twig. Truck drivers in Siberia during the winter have become the folk heroes. Like the Pony Express of the American West, they keep the convoy rolling. They never shut off the motor at truck stops. They only change drivers. To try to restart at 40 below is difficult, if not impossible. Another part of important transportation in Siberian villages and towns, long-haired Siberian horses that pull sleds. This is the bread delivery service, and if you're concerned that that bread is not all wrapped up in plastic, well, at least you don't have to worry about being fresh. It's been frozen since the moment it left the oven. And if you go to this little Siberian market in order to buy milk, well, you don't buy a bottle of milk. You buy a cake of milk, frozen solid, just like a cake of ice. Well, native Siberians are called Yakuts. That's a rather broad classification. And one of the more interesting subgroupings are the so-called Chukchi, or reindeer people, who live in the northeastern tip of Siberia, very near Alaska. Once nomads, they've now been collectivized by the Soviet government. And after initial difficulties with that government, they adapted. They probably adopted a philosophy long popular in this country, that one must cope in order to survive. For the Chukchi, they have had to cope not only with the harsh environment, but also with the imposition of a strange way of life. But European Russians have also had to cope with centuries of Tsarist persecution, of wartime destruction, of all of those atrocities associated with the Stalin era. But perhaps all of that has given Russians a resilient toughness so necessary for their ultimate survival. In our travels through the Soviet Union, we have found in most cases the Russians as individuals to be delightful people. In any situation, they're always fascinating. The country itself at times can be annoying, frustrating, even at times a bit frightening. But it's also been an exciting place to get to see, to get to know those 129 ethnic groups we as Americans have chosen to call Russians.